Welcome. My name is Carol Carter. I'm the founder and CEO of Global Minded, and we are delighted to have you join us today for the fourth segment of Earth Week, Financing Global Solutions and Regenerative Culture. We're delighted to have a number of very distinguished panelists from different parts of the world joining us today. And I'd like to share a little bit more about this session today in the context of the week of Earth Week. I want to first thank our partners for this, and we've got the World Academy of Art and Sciences. Amazing leadership. You heard from Dr. Gary Jacobs and Dr. Mila Popovich yesterday, the Foundation for Climate Restoration, Dr. Erica Dodds, and the Alliance Center, and that's Steve Sheathe, who's representing as our moderator today. And the context of this entire week, if you haven't been able to join us earlier, is we've had programs every day. And tomorrow we're going to have a summary with all of the different students and other leaders on where do we go forward to really enact this kind of climate change. But today we're delighted to be able to really talk about how to move the capital to make that happen. So it's my pleasure to introduce Steve Sheathe. He's the chair of the board of directors of the Alliance Center, which is a nonprofit organization serving the Denver hub for people and organizations creating a truly sustainable future. He's managing director of Thrive Partners, a consultancy building on his many years as a national authority to the sustainable, responsible impact investing industry. He's also a member of the executive team of Future Capital, and you'll hear a little bit more about Future Capital from Lawrence today. So Steve, thank you so much for being here and putting this incredible group of people together for us today.
Well, thank you, Carol. It's an incredible opportunity to work with this amazing group of people today. Some of them I've known well, and some are new friends as of this morning, at least this morning in Denver. I know we have people from other parts of the world who are tuned in here as well. But a little bit more about my background, and really for the purpose of helping people understand why I've been tapped or why I'm serving as moderator for this particular session, with this amazing group and on this particular topic, which is so important. So I've been in the financial services space in one capacity or another since 1977. But about 30 years ago, I was introduced to this radical notion that investors could consciously direct investment capital in a manner that could, in fact, not only achieve financial goals, but maybe make the world a better place. And that was like spitting into the wind at that time. Subsequently, I've been very directly involved in growing a vibrant, sustainable, responsible impact investing industry in the US and in fact around the world. And it's now, kind of taken over as, the hot, the sexy, the place to put money. And we're going to hear more about that as we proceed this morning. But there's something underneath all of that I think is really important. If we think about the global economy as a living thing, then you have to look at money as the lifeblood of the global economy. And if money is not flowing in the right direction, or if it's sick, we've got a sick global economy. And I think that is part of the affliction that we're all, kind of suffering from or struggling through these days. So, my 30 years in the financial services space, has kind of led me, actually has forced me to think long and hard for a long time about the topic that we're here to discuss today. About a year and a half ago, Lawrence Ford gave me a call and invited me to become part of a new group, a new initiative called Future Capital. And this is I think, again, a radical idea that we can consciously connect and heal the tissue, the connective tissue between consciousness, human consciousness, and capital in all of its forms. And that there's some incredible value, incredible benefits to humanity and to the planet itself if we can do that successfully. And in doing that, we have to look at systems, and that's what we're here to talk about today. The Alliance Center, my association with the Alliance Center is a little different in the sense that, as you said, it's the hub for sustainability for people and organizations looking to create a truly sustainable future here in Colorado, a future that works for everybody. So one of the things that I think is really important is we keep in mind that everybody includes all of the diversity within humanity, and in fact, all of the diversity of life on the planet. So the socio-systems changes that are needed to heal the lifeblood of this global economy and to bring balance back into the relationship between humanity and nature, or humanity and the living planet, that we call home, is what we're all about today. So I'm thrilled to be able to work with this group and to introduce each of them individually. What we're going to do is move one by one, and essentially it's going to be the lineup that you saw. Those of you that might even have it in front of you, the lineup that you saw in the promo flyer that was sent out to us. I'm going to be doing brief introductions for each of the panelists and then inviting them to tell you a little bit more about themselves in the beginning of their prepared remarks. You will find links in the chat box already to more information about each of these panelists, these amazing thought and action leaders. So don't hesitate to dig deeper if you're interested. So we're going to start with Sandrine Declève. Sandrine is an energy policy expert. She's co-president of the Club of Rome. She was previously the director of the Prince of Wales Corporate Leaders Group, and she directed the European Union office of the Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership. That's a mouthful, but it's only a teeny bit of what Sandrine is really all about. So Sandrine, step up and take center stage here, please.
Thank you so much, Steve, and it's a real pleasure to be invited for this incredible panel and what I hope will be a very excited and knowledgeable exchange, because I think we should all be excited about the possibilities and the opportunities before us post-COVID, but also obviously taking into consideration the difficulties that we're all faced with. I am coming from a variety of different perspectives. As you said, I've basically had 30 years of working with policymakers across the globe, working in the UN, working with the European Commission, but also working with business leaders on sustainability, energy, and climate. And I brought that to my new function as the co-president of the Club of Rome. But also I'm very lucky to be able to sit on the board of several different organizations, including an organization called Climate Kick that does deep demonstration work in terms of how we can really shift economies into low carbon economies. I also am working with, as an ambassador for the Energy Transition Commission, that is looking at the hard to abate sectors and the energy and the transport sectors and how we can actually shift those sectors. And then I'm also a chair of a new think tank for the European Commission called the Economic and Societal Implications of Innovation and Research. So I feel that I've been so blessed with all of these different possibilities to influence change. And my remarks are very much going to be linked to that. In fact, I forgot one very important remark linked to this particular panel, which is I also sit on the technical and expert group on sustainable finance in the European Commission. We're very much looking at the taxonomy. So first, what I wanted to do was bring in the irony and the sad irony of the fact that for the last 50 years, the Club of Rome has really been indicating that actually we have a limits to growth issue, that we have an overconsumption issue, that due to overpopulation, we will put such stress on the planetary boundaries that therefore we will have a series of crises. Most recently, we published the Planetary Emergency Plan and set up a partnership of about 180 institutes, scientific economists, as well as NGOs, to talk about the convergence of two tipping points. This was the premise in September when we presented it to Gutierrez, Secretary General of the UN, but also a series of different government leaders who were with us, saying we have a convergence of two tipping points: biodiversity loss and climate change. And therefore, our planet is in a situation of emergency. And now we find ourselves with the convergence of 3 tipping points, which is that we have climate, biodiversity, and clearly COVID as a response to those people and livelihoods are the central focus of what we need to look at. And therefore, why this conversation is so important is that what we need to do is bring all of that thought leadership, actually, that many of us have. We've been talking about the need for systems change in our economic and financial systems for ages. It's not as if this is new, but now we can demonstrate that due to those tipping points, our systems are totally broken. So the premise that actually leaders now are discussing going back to business as usual and propping up an economy that was not functioning before and got us into this mess is absolutely ludicrous. And so what we need to do as thought leaders, as economists, as investors like yourself and others, is to look at 2 things, at least in the finance sector. One is, how do we create the system interventions that we need now to make people comfortable with short-term interventions that are going to help them and their livelihoods as we get out of this mess. Because going in and saying we need total systems change now, we can forget it, and we will not be bringing people on the journey. So what are those key interventions that we need? And I would say that we already have some of them. We've got stress testing that has been put forward by many banks, in particular the Bank of England, but also other central banks. We've got the possibility of looking at new taxonomies and frameworks that are looking at criteria for what actually green projects and climate stressed projects are. We've got disclosure regulations. We've got a series of potential regulations that are already at our fingertips, which would enable us to make sure that whatever we do in terms of fiscal stimulus has some level of conditionality attached so that we don't go back to business as usual. But then I think what's very important as well is that we need to also then think about how do we create true resilience within our financial system. So changing the finance system so that it is value driven, changing the economic system so that it is an economic system that's based on people, planet, and prosperity with people at the center, looking at well-being, looking at donut economics, which now has been applied by Kate Raworth, for example, in Amsterdam, coming up with specific models of how we can actually apply these systems. Those are the conversations now that the Club of Rome is having. We're very actively involved with European governments. We've sent out also a series of open letters. If anyone wants, they can go onto our website. We've also sent out a letter recently to the G20. And in those letters, we clearly indicate that this is the way in which we need to move forward in order to ensure that we move towards systems change, but that we look at where do we already have short-term intervention points that will enable us to create the foundation for the future that we need.
Amazing. Thank you so much. The Club of Rome has done incredible work on this for many years, and yet not very many people know about it. I'm going to circle back a little bit later and ask you a little bit more about that. So Lawrence, time for you to step up into the spotlight here on our virtual main stage. Lawrence Ford is the founder of Conscious Capital Wealth Management. He's also, as I mentioned earlier, the founder of Future Capital Initiative, and he's a good friend for many years. Conscious Capital Wealth is a different wealth management firm. And when I say different, I mean different in a really good way. Because they don't just help their clients, they don't just care about the clients' financial lives, they also care about the health and well-being of their clients. And so, Lawrence, I'd love to have you, just share a little bit more about that and put it in the perspective of this topic, please.
Thank you, Steve. And thank you, Carol, as always, for doing this beautiful conference every year. I wish I was out in Denver for my big hugs, but we'll have to put up with this for now. Sandrine, beautiful comments. Nice to meet you virtually, and my friends at Club of Rome and World Academy of Arts and Sciences. It's nice to see you here as well. I have so much to say, and a little bit of time. I'd rather hear the rest of you and have some more dialogue back and forth. So I'll keep my comments brief. And we'll come from a perspective of 3 things really that I would like to highlight in this brief remarks. The first is that all change, all true systems change begins inside each of us first. And so I'll be coming today, which is a place that's not typical in my industry, but from this nexus of consciousness and capital. And so from the idea of consciousness, you know, if we think of our tools that we create as a society in our nice, creative, intelligent ways, we look at capital. Capital is really nothing more than a pointed stick or a knife. It's a tool that we're using out there in the world. And sometimes we spend so much time trying to reconfigure the knife or resharpen the tools or redirect the tools in different ways, when in fact, it's really just us as a species who chooses to use them in certain ways. So the first comment I want to make is that, you know, all of us, the systems change comes from within first. And when we take a look and we look at ancient wisdom or a lot of the indigenous wisdom that still has a beautiful voice that we have ignored over many years, they will look at our societies and they'll see a bunch of sleepwalkers moving from A to B and A to B back and forth, and nobody is truly present. And so when you take that concept of not literally being here with this powerful pointed stick called capital we've created, no wonder that we're using this in ways that are unintended, that are destroying the earth and each other. And so the first point is really my call, clarion call to each of us to wake up and begin to use this unprecedented time where our Mother Earth has set us all into our corners for a time out to think about what we've done. And from a personal point of view, becoming still with yourself and becoming in a quiet space is the warrior's way. And it's the most difficult thing that we can do as an individual, because that's what really brings to us all of these little rocks and stones and warts and things we need to grow through personally in our own life that we've been entertaining ourselves with external noise and distractions. So first is I'm honoring the fact that it is a challenging time for each of us internally, and also a wonderful time for us to awaken. And so the second thing I'll say in these brief remarks is that we all have power and responsibility, and that's something we've all forgotten. So in a capital market, from an individual point of view, becoming conscious of how we actually spend our money, becoming conscious of how we invest our money, and becoming conscious of where we actually earn our money. Those three fundamentals, it's no longer okay to be unconscious about those three. And this is our true power by using that capital that we've created as man going forward. And so, Steve, I'm sure we'll have more discussions about future capital and the wonderful work we're doing with the UN and global leadership, but I wanted to make the point about individual responsibility, because that's the only place that true revolutions ever begin and sustain.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I'm going to move on now to Stefan Brunnhuber. Stefan, welcome. Stefan is an economist, psychiatrist, board member of both the World Academy of Art and Science as well as the Club of Rome. He's the medical director of the Diakonie Clinic. I'm not sure I'm even pronouncing that correctly, so pardon me if I have not, of integrative psychiatry in Dresden. Stefan, you know, you bring a very different perspective here as both economist and psychiatrist and medical professional. We'd love to hear your perspective on this particular topic as a, you know, to give us a little bit more of a foundation upon which to build through the rest of our conversations here today.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the invitation, and thank you also specifically very much for this challenging format and the crazy timing, speaking 4 or 5 minutes on this very important topic. I'm actually calling you from my hospital. I'm gonna go back to my ward in about an hour ago. But I will focus on something we at the World Economy are been doing since about 5 years. We are running since 5 years a working group with over 40 hearings and expert hearings and panels and background discussions and meetings with experts on one single question. And the single question was simply, how are we able to finance our future? How can we really finance our future with ongoing asymmetric shocks, the one we're just currently perceiving, as Sandrine says, but also within planetary boundaries where everything is connected with everything, right? And we started with SDGs in 2015, and we have a political consensus globally for all the 17 goals. We have scientific evidence for all the 17 goals, how to achieve them. We have all the technological know-how to how to get there. But there was one question we've missed out. And the question was, how are we going to finance all that? How can we install the right incentives or the reward system to enable that shift from a high carbon to a low carbon economy, for an unfair to a fair, from unsustainable to a more sustainable economy. Just to note, in order to finance this roadmap we all approved, we need roughly $4 to $5 trillion annually. And we approved to finance that, in fact, in 12 to 15 years. This was the political consensus. And the question is, how can we get there? If we follow business as usual, it will be from a financial perspective, it will be far too expensive, far too low in volume, and far too slow in speed to achieve the 5 trillion required for the SDGs. You know, we were trying to come up with an out-of-the-box approach, which on one side honors the conventional tools and all the knowledge we are in place, from regulatory efforts to taxation, to impact funding, to partnership, to private partnership. And we try to see what are out-of-the-box approaches available that can help us and guarantee that shift from high to low carbon economy, that help us really financing these 17 SDGs. And if we consider all that, we'll end up having new financial engineerings in place, which goes far beyond the traditional financial engineerings we know of. And we come up with a set of about 12 to 15 of them. They're all basically trying to fill the gap required in order to finance our future. So when we're talking about this Tower of Finance initiative, we should not rely on corporate social responsibility and charity and taxes and fees only. We have to look at new financial engineerings and reward systems that enable us to shift towards SDG and cope with ongoing asymmetric shocks like COVID-19, global warming, biodiversity, among others. And at its core, we're talking about parallel, additional, regulated liquidity, which is basically, technically speaking, blockchain-associated distributed ledger technology, 3rd or 4th generation, which will affect the entire financial system, from the bond market, which is a $100 trillion market, to all the assets under management, which is a $40 trillion market, to the well-known carbon bubble, which is a $20 trillion market, to sovereign wealth fund, which is a $7 trillion market, and so on. If we do that right, and we are in conversation with the corporate world already, we can make that happen. Relatively cheap, fast, resilient, fair, and we can create a greater superior equilibrium for all of us. And this is feasible within several months on a country level. And we can provide all the empirical evidence, hopefully within the next couple of months. So if you're interested in this initiative, which is now running since 5 years, and we'll come up with our report in summer this year, please contact me or contact the WAS office, and I'm happy to further discuss this issue. Thank you very much.
And thank you. I want to encourage everybody, anybody listening who might have a question for any member of the panel, to drop that into the chat box or into the Q&A feature that you can access on your screen. Mm-hmm. If you have a question about how to access that, put that into the chat box as well, and we'll have somebody respond. But as you can see, we have an incredibly rich tapestry of thought and action leadership being demonstrated here this morning. And we're going to get as quickly as we can to your questions so that we can address those things that you are most interested in. So at this point, I want to turn and introduce Julene Siddique. Julene is coming to us from somewhere in England. I hope it's not raining. Transdisciplinary scientist, artist, entrepreneur, the director of education for the Laszlo Institute of New Paradigm Research. Julene has done some extensive work based on my reading at the intersection where arts, health, education, and culture meet.
Yeah.
You know, very interested in, I know you're gonna talk to us about your socio-systemic approach to things. So take it away.
Great. Yes. So at the intersection of arts, health, culture, and also education, one thing I will bring up, first of all, I love what everyone has had to say. Lawrence, with changing mindsets around what capital is, realizing that system change comes from within. With Stefan bringing up the clear challenges is if we're really going to do this, what it's going to take. Changing systems, changing structures, very important. From the perspective of what I have done as an artist, activist, scientist, and entrepreneur, watching different efforts for structural change, you need to deal with ideology. And one of the failures, which I studied in anthropology of development, the failures of development, was not engaging enough with culture, not understanding the power of culture, things being expressed in a way that has a local cultural force, but also understanding culture is knowledge. So what we're working on in the G21 working group is understanding social knowledge systems, right? Understanding how to affect both mechanisms and mindsets, and how these two things interlink in a process of systems change. So the first thing I wanted to start with, which I think was touched on by everyone in a really great way, is structures and systems. At the intersection of health and culture, there's been amazing work on social detriments of health. What are the systems and structures that decide who is at risk and who is not? And what are the societal structures that cause harm? And this was done by Harvard University Center for Social Medicine, Global Health and Social Medicine, that in fact, in global health, one of the biggest issues is structural violence. So what I want to talk about in the context of environment is the structural incentives. And I think Stefan started talking about that actually we have systems which are incentivizing consumerism. We have, there's a psychology behind economics, which Lauren started to talk about, that if you treat economics in this consumerist approach, that's the psychology we breed. And we see that tied into numerous things in the health sector. Which work-related trauma, which is something that I've worked with people saying like the same symptoms that come out in war zones that they're having in terms of shock, in terms of, because everyone's out to get them. It's complete competition. You're only seen by your job title. All of these things that it's all intersecting in the actual psychology from systems incentives. So if we are really going to solve the problems with the environment, socio-systemic, the systemic part of that means systems which incentivize a different type of mentality, a relationship with the earth, a relationship on well-being and well-being measures. Really broad-based systems, as well as what Sandrine is talking about, which is, the interventions in the meantime, the bridging mechanisms, the reform mechanisms, which Lawrence is doing a great job with Future Capital. So that's the systemic side, which we've all touched on. And the second part, which is connected to it, is the socio part. And one of the, Peter Dautry has written a great book on knowledge wars in terms of with the environment, the knowledge of scientists and how that was challenged by knowledge hierarchies in the media and knowledge hierarchies with political agendas. And what we're talking with ecological cultures, cultures which have, or traditions, be them indigenous, like Lawrence was talking about, that they have a different type of knowledge. It may not be this very analytical type of knowing, but they have ways of knowing with themselves, ways of communicating with nature. And there's been a hierarchy made through our dominant ideologies, such as neoliberalism, that have sort of put these other ways of knowing, which are in fact very connected to the type of culture, sustainable cultures that we need in a different domain. And so there are some really key ways of addressing knowledge hierarchies and addressing different forms of cultural change. But what I am looking at essentially is how systemic addressing structural violence, systemic incentives, intervention, structural interventions, how this interlocks with the knowledge power relationship, and what does that socio-systemic process look like. And there's been some amazing, I always try to stay in the grassroots, with the people, like Carol was saying, just really with the on the ground realities. There have been some amazing initiatives, everything from socio-systemic innovation. I work closely with Alexander Laszlo in the Laszlo Institute, and he works on systemic innovation. So what are the system leverage points, okay, in these structurally violent systems? What are the key leverage points, and making your innovations there? This is one way. Okay, and also those initiatives themselves being really embedded in dialogue with the people that they serve, right? Having an embedded sustainability within them. This is one effort. On more of the cultural side, culture hacking was an amazing initiative. He's actually an anthropologist of economies, okay, and development, and they brought together from LSE, and they brought together activists from all over the globe. I'm talking South America, Africa, India. It was incredible to bring together collective intelligence and say, okay, how do we solve this? And they put together a brilliant method called culture hacking, which identifies a couple of important things. Mapping in the local context, and how does that local context connect to the structures of power in the wider society. And when people see that the everyday experience of their life, we're talking about every day, we're not talking about something that's said from afar or by the media. Their everyday lived experience is connected to hierarchies and structures, and how a local practice there can affect change. It becomes very empowering. They identified placatory practice, surface level action to the symptoms of a problem. They said, this is why activism is failing. We're talking about symptoms. We're doing symptomology. We're not going to the cause, and we are not intersectional. We are not seeing the wider picture. Campaigns that are too narrow, campaigns that don't know how to work with each other, that are working on environment and are actually inflicting each other. They identified pure activism, uninformed action that is not causal, that is not context-based, a broad brush of activism that doesn't apply in different contexts. So if from a grassroots approach, I will send you the link. They're putting together some phenomenal work. So this is what I'm looking at, the interface of structural change and the interface of really working with culture, with praxis, with dialogical cultural action. And this is a point brought up by a very important social theorist called Paulo Freire, that oppression says, you do what I say. It is anti-dialogue. There's no dialogue. You do what I say. And dialogic cultural action, when present in a full form, doesn't allow oppression to exist, right? So there's a very, very important cultural component that I've worked with in arts, in the intersection of where health meets structural violence and social movements there, that putting together amazing case studies of how you engage, culture, like bringing together, all these activists working locally with re-experiencing the everyday, and then birthing new activists and everyday people just through how they can structure choices in their life. That I think this is very important for what we're doing if we're talking about the breakthroughs in thinking that we found, and why, we saw this beautiful video, on the first day of this in 1972. Oh God, we had these ideals in 1972, and, I've seen the development goals and Millennium Development Goals, and geez, we gotta get it right this time. So what are these key breakthroughs that we've had that we now know about structurally? That the structure of the financial system, the structure of the educational system, the structure of aid, that we need to make some fundamental changes to. And how do we not be top down, like Carol was saying, engage in an inclusive conversation? Who are the people that we haven't listened to, and what is the unlocked collective intelligence? What is the unlocked potential of even everyday people to play a critical role? So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Wow. As everybody, I think, can easily see, we could go for hours with each and every one of these amazing people who are serving as panelists here this morning. But I want to turn next to Pavel Bucher. Pavel, thank you for joining us. I know you got here a little bit late this morning. Would have had a fun time just interacting with you briefly before we got on this call. So everybody knows, Pavel is the founder of the Global Education Futures, which is aimed at catalyzing the transformation of educational ecosystems at a global scale. He's co-founder of the Global Change Leaders Movement of Educational and Social Innovators, and he's a professor at the Moscow School of Management. Pavel, step up into the spotlight here on our main stage.
Yes, thank you very much. And I'm excited to be in this panel with so many friends whose lovely faces I enjoyed to see today. And I think we're discussing a very important issue, which I'm also a co-founding member of Future Capital Initiative, supporting the work of Lawrence and other colleagues. And I lead the group on education, or as we call it, transformation of consciousness within that initiative. And that is something that I want to talk about, how education, work with culture, work with grassroots movements, as Julene was talking, connects with a massive challenge we are facing. So first of all, I think the purpose of our work is not to combat crisis, to solve problems we are facing. Because in the words of Buckminster Fuller, it is important to find ways to make existing problems obsolete by changing the framework, by changing the paradigm. And actually, we are in the moment where we need to look for the paradigm shift. Julene is also representing, I'm also participating in the Laszlo Institute for the New Paradigm. We are working exactly on that. And part of the story about New Paradigm is that we need to realize that we are sharing this world with so many other species, so many other forces, that we cannot just say this is a world for humans alone. We need to look for the ways to implement in practice the post-anthropocentric worldview. And that the post-anthropocentric worldview in practice means that we need to change our metrics of success, the ways we commodify or de-commodify certain things. And I think we, first of all, need to realize that the planet is alive, it's talking to us, and we need to reconnect with planet. And we need, some people are saying that coronavirus may be an invitation from planet to talk with us and to see if we hear its message. And it's an opportunity to begin that communication. And I think planet talks to us in many other ways, by climate change, by biospecies diversity laws, and many other things. We have to hear that message. So, but that change is not only a political or economic issue alone. It has to be a cultural shift. It has to begin in the systems that comprehend our society. A lot of people have been indicating that one of the major problems is how we know what we know. It's an epistemological problem, as Gregory Bateson has indicated 50 years ago, that how do we know the world? We need to revisit that. And we need to understand that we have to work with systems of science, systems of culture, systems of media, art, and education to help people comprehend that the world is much more complex. We need to learn how to live with this complexity. We need to learn how to live with a world that is living world. And so, of course, we need technology to support us with this. And I fully support the idea that Stefan expressed, that there are different tools that enable us to do it. We probably shouldn't think of a single tool, a single blockchain there, or cryptocurrency solutions. Their potential has been heavily underused at this moment. We need to see that the work that, for example, Chinese government is doing. Everybody says that social ranking is a huge problem. In fact, it could also be a pathway to establish at a very large scale a desired behavior to live according to values that will produce thrivability in our planet. If we install it with a more holistic framework in mind. And that is what we need to do. We need to start redesigning to cultivate these projects and actually redesign frameworks that help different kinds of technologies work for the future of humanity. We need to build these new solutions from the future we want to see. That's what we call a practice of the future. We need to focus on the idea of practicing the future in today. Our approach in that regard is called protopia, the prototyping the future in the present. And right now we are starting mapping out different communities that do it, from permaculture community to blockchain communities, communities that try to establish practices of the future in the present. That's the pathway to go. To finish, I think that, again, the issue of creating financing mechanisms and mechanisms of economy for the global society to address challenges and create regenerative cultures begins with cultivation of a new mindset and education, first of all, of investors, economic agents, and policymakers. And we need to cultivate communities of practice. And in the end, we need to weave, or as we say, garden, an ecosystem of global change agents and start prototyping. The more we prototype, the faster we get to where we want to get. We don't need to think about solutions. We need to start cultivating these solutions, amplifying what exists there at the grassroots level. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to take a big risk here and ask a question that I'd like each of my panelists to respond to. The risk is that everybody will have an expansive response. But I want to ask you to try to keep it to no more than a minute. What I'm going to try to do is to set a diamond, a huge diamond in the middle of the room, the metaphorical room here. And as you know, if you look at a diamond from different directions, it's got different facets and reflects light in different ways. So there's different perspectives. So as I think about the topic that we're focused on here today, finance and global solutions, the need for socio-systemic change, the need for a new mindset. I think every speaker has touched on, if not focused on, the need to change consciousness, to raise consciousness, the need to integrate that into cultural solutions, for the culture itself, the culture of humanity, each part of humanity, to kind of get it and get it internally before it can then manifest externally, as demonstrated then in that manifestation in resource decision making, which is where money and capital kind of come into the game. So the question is, how do you see, from your unique and amazing perspectives, how do you see us proceeding from here? How does humanity get from point A to point B and do it relatively quickly? because as Sandrine said in chat, we don't have another 50 years. The clock is ticking. So how do we do this quickly? Whoever would like to start, go ahead, Sandrine.
Yeah, I'm just floored by this conversation and want to say how touched I am by all the things that have been said, firstly. Especially your work, Julene. I could not agree more. And in fact, taking that work into account, I'm going to be very honest. I don't think we can do the same things we've been doing for the last 50 years. I don't think it will work, period. So if we continue with our thought leadership stance, which is we know better, and therefore you just better listen to us, which is pretty much what the environmental community, the consciousness community has been saying. Because let me be very clear, and I'm going to be incredibly provocative. That person who right now is stuck in their apartment in New York, who's getting beaten time and time again through domestic abuse, could give a shit about consciousness. I'm sorry. And that is the person that we need to get to. What we need is to figure out how we can shift the whole vision and bring people on board so they understand it from their core. As post-COVID, we need to do things differently, because if we don't, we will feel even worse than we did before. We know this is the first generation that's going to be making less money than any other generation. We know that we've got the highest rates of suicide. We know that we have the highest rates of mental breakdowns. What we had before was not healthy. So somehow we need to do that. Now, how we do that is what Julene's work is so important. It's how do we bridge the gap between the artists, the cultural, the psychiatrists, the economists. How do we bring all these people together? And I'll make one last point. I think the conversations we've had with scientists and economists right now, we're all wanting to get into this right now because we're in the most phenomenal opportunity we've ever had, because people's consciousness is shifting, maybe not in exactly the same way we would like them to. They can't do their yoga necessarily, they can't do their meditation, but they sure in the hell are starting to respect nature because they want to get the hell out of their apartment. That is what we need to tap into. And so that's what I would say. Let's do it differently. Let's figure out, let's be strategic, and let's get out of our own ecosystems into the proper ecosystem to do it right.
Go ahead, Pavel. Take yourself off mute.
Yes, thank you very much, Sandrine, for starting this conversation. I think it's important to reach out to many people that exactly are blocked now. They're blocked in the sense of frustration, in the sense of fear, in the sense of not realizing what the future can bring them. So as I mentioned in the chat, right now we are starting this new initiative to help hold many conversations that can happen online, to envision the future we want to see, to envision the inspiring future, to recognize all the things ahead of us. We call it post-coronavirus futures. And we want to encourage as many conversations as possible around the world by creating facilitation packs. We're future mapping to integrate voices of both experienced futurists and grassroots communities and projects that people start to cultivate in response to this coronavirus crisis. And we are launching the website on Friday, that is tomorrow, so to start the process. And I think it's a prototype of something we can do for many other issues. So we are seeing this as a prototype because corona crisis is just one of the examples of these VUCA situations, of these complexity, uncertainty, and high impact situations that we are going to face in the next decades. So we need to learn how to mobilize human potential, how people can get inspired themselves, how they can be empowered to actually do things and not feel powerless. So that's the learning we are going through. We need to learn how to amplify it. We are doing it right now, so I'll be happy to invite you to join this. Thank you.
Thank you. Stefan?
Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah, thank you. Referring to the previous speakers, I have the feeling that we are in a planetary momentum now, where the first time outside of a war zone, we have a state where 7.5 billion people are in a mental readiness for change, which never happened before. We don't know where the change is going. It can go back and forth. It can go worse or better. But we never had a situation globally where 7.5 billion people, due to this COVID-19 virus, is ready to change. We see millions and millions of Indians changing their behaviors. We see millions and billions of people being ready to do something different than we did in the past, right? If that's the case, and we know from psychiatry, readiness and preparedness for change is one of the preconditions we know in addictive medicine, for example, in the psychiatry, for a real change towards a more healthy lifestyle, right? So if we take this finding, this clinical finding on a collective level, and then ask, what is the single most important factor required then for the change? For me personally, it is also not the consciousness level, it is the financial sector. The financial sector will reward and incentivize and multiply where we want to go, to the good or to the bad. Thank you.
Thank you. Julene, I can't tell if you're raising your hand or what. Take yourself off mute. Take yourself off mute. We can't hear you.
Zoom.
You're still on mute. There you are.
There we go.
Am I unmuted?
Yes, you are. Go.
Okay, great. Okay. I'm having, I think, internet issues. So, all right. Okay. So, Sandrine, I was trying to write to you in the chat to say thank you, but I'm having weird Zoom internet issues. But thank you for, understanding the importance of this work. But thank all of you for the work that you're doing. So I just want to bring up a few points in relation to what Sandrine said, and Steve as well. The first point is that we need to really wholeheartedly recognize our systemic incentives and the work that has been done in mapping this socio-systemic work. We have systems that are polarizing. We don't have integral systems, okay? Even in the anthropology of aid and amazing scholars like James Scott, why he wrote a book, I think it was back in the 90s, Why Schemes to Improve the Human Condition Have Failed. And the very structure of the nonprofit framework, okay? So we need to be thinking structurally. We have to realize that our current systems are polarizing, even in terms of narratives. You know, right wing, left wing, global north, global south, the have-nots, polarized. And so we need integral systems, because we know that there's a big intersectionality to what we're dealing with, how finance and economic psychology relates directly to health, how health relates directly to social outcomes, environment clearly, the tie-in to resources, and we can, that the COVID crisis we're seeing today. So integral systems which acknowledge intersectionality, the ability for interreflections and integral systems, these are the affordances. If you do not have interreflective, integrated systems, you do not have the systemic affordances for these really comprehensive solutions. So that, I would say, would be one thing. I would also definitely say you cannot do structural work alone. So a lot of people that have introduced big structural change, they struggle with ideology, or they call it market, who's going to take this very different way of operating. What we know about behavioral change is that you need experiences on multiple levels, okay? So just chanting a slogan is not going to work, okay? You need to work with communities experientially, right? They need to re-experience their everyday experience. So that kind of very localized work that becomes the sort of network model that Pavel is working with, localized work, network model, understanding aid involved, everyone's involved in development, in the environmental challenge, not just NGOs. How to localize your work by re-experiencing the everyday. And the other thing is counter narratives. One of the things that happens in this localized community work, in the re-experiencing of every day, is dealing with people debunking the narratives of their society and how they've been disempowered by those. You know, so the counter narrative, be it to neoliberalism or be it to, you know, there are even plenty of narratives that are saying that, you know, people that still believe that the climate emergency isn't as real as you think, or still, you know, free market or whatever you want. So really strengthening counter narratives and the process through which those counter narratives are created needs to be localized and generative. Generative knowledge is a really big thing. So not you're doing what I say, you're not regurgitating information that I give you. Knowledge generated through experience. Ownership of that learning experience is a big empowerment thing. So a lot of these cultural strategies have really been left out of the domain of development, you know, which has actually seen development as hitting a certain economic mark, GDP, you know, which we know leaves a lot of loopholes. So I think if we can work more locally, generatively, connect those networks and have global local dialogues in that kind of dialogic generative way, if we understand the value of everyday people remapping the choices in their life, if we address the big, you know, structures and systems and create system intervention strategies, systems change, as well as new systems that they act as a light of where we're going, because the process of change, people get nervous of where it's going. So we need really good prototypes and examples of new systems. And this is the sort of integral framework that we need to bring together that we haven't before, just the new level of coherence and the new level of cooperation, which we're going to absolutely need on all levels, individual, personal, spiritual, collective, organizational, if we're really going to meet this challenge. And so that would be my input. And I think we can do it. I think, you know, that's what this project is here to do, is to create this integral strategy. So that would be, it's not going to be easy, but it's going to take every single one of us making a personal connection, a system connection, and an organizational connection. So.
Thank you, Julene. We've only got a few minutes left. Carol, let me just check in with you. Do you want us to wrap at the top?
You know what we'll do, why don't we go to Lawrence? We can have his insight, and then
Sure.
I'll do the wrap and share. I want to share a couple insights as well, because we are very grassroots on the ground. So after Lawrence and
Good.
And any other thoughts you have, we'll do that, and we'll you know, be able to answer people's questions through email as well, or we can wrap and take questions following. So go ahead, Lauren.
Step up.
Okay, thank you. I will do my best to go New York speed here so we can move on. Or I should say New York speed a month ago. So couple basic things here that I want to say. One of the things that struck me deepest in this conversation is about system leverage points, Julene, and everybody spoke about that in different ways. Without leverage points, we don't get to where we need to get right now. It's just called working smart. So what are our two most powerful tools as a species? Our consciousness. We can talk about that in many different ways, many different languaging, but we all get what that is. It's the thing that happens before it gets manifested out into the world in our actions, whether it be that individual who is in the abuser or the abused sardine in the home, right? Acting out their own unconscious shadows, or whether it be our capital being weaponized as a tool out there in the world, which has been destroying the earth and everybody else and oppressing so many people. So I think those are the two leverage points we work with. And there's a couple things that I think of very quickly around that. Number one is from an individual empowerment, which I spoke about earlier. We are at this unprecedented place in the world, Stefan. I'm totally with you there. It's like for the first time, we have an opportunity of a mass awakening. where everybody, all of these 7.5 billion people are experiencing the same disruption in their life. So there's a huge leverage point there that we need to come together with. And the second is obviously this tool called capital. And part of Future Capital, what we're doing is bringing together, and many different organizations are, and we want to work together with that as well, which I have one final comment on, but bring together this tool that clearly, because of men and women's shortcomings, have not used this board game well. So we need to change some of the rules of the board game, clearly, because it's been used to weaponize a tool that has otherwise been set up to do good in the world and has lifted billions from poverty and done well, but clearly out of control right now. So consciousness and capital is, I think, where we need to focus. I have one other comment for the panel and all of our listeners. And the final comment is about the need for global leadership and people like us here on this panel and our listeners and other people around the world to come together in a different way that we have not yet figured out how to do. When we look at history and we look at these problems that some of us know exist today, then some external event or timing just comes to a place where the attention coalesces and we all say, yeah, that is an issue we need to come together with. And there's this beautiful time in history where we all come together. That energy becomes defragmented to a point where people are working on the same issues. What happens after that historically, time and time again, is with a lot of good intent, we all come with our own models, we come with our own organizations, we come with our own initiatives, and sadly, the energy starts to fragment back out again. Completely unintended consequences, but if you look carefully, that's what we do as a species, time and time again. And so what I call for is, together as a group and these participants, is how do we, with all of these wonderful organizations, truly come together within the work that we're doing in this paradox of what you're doing is very special because it has its own flavor of who you are, and it's not different than what we need to do to come together to make these changes at this very important time.
Carol, I just want to thank everybody on this call, everybody who's speaking, everybody who's participating. Really appreciate your time. I know that there's a lot of other things that every one of us could be doing, and the fact that you chose to be with us today is quite an honor. So Carol,
and Steve, thank you as well for your time. And I just want to share a few things because when we started earlier, I kind of raced through, and normally every day I start talking about what Global Minded is and what we do. And we create a capable, diverse talent pipeline to get more women, people of color, underrepresented into the education, economic mobility, and leadership pipeline. And so sort of the insights that I'd like to share just as we close here today is that we have to what I call break down the hidden walls of power, place, privilege, and a lot of patriarchal old modes that just aren't allowing us to work in a world without the hierarchy. And we need a world without the hierarchy to accomplish these ambitious goals. I think we're going from the old model of experts to the new model of question asking and really listening and engaging with what we at Global Minded call uncommon collaborators, the people that are not normally in the circles that we're used to being in, and to really reach and forge very strong connections with those groups, which is why it's been really great working with Mila and also Dr. Erica Dodds to bring this confluence of different people together in this week. I think the other thing is that everyone under 15 is diverse, and that it's so inspiring to be working with those people. But if we can build the bridge of moving the money and moving, the awareness with some of the other people who hold the purse strings to what these young people can enact, we can do incredible things. So I think there's got to be a lot of different bridge building, and we all have the capacity to connect those different, very diverse networks right now and get major things done. So anyway, with that, I'll just say, want to thank all of you. Your insights, so appreciate them. And would also just like to share our email addresses for those of you who want to write us, and then we'll In a couple of minutes, we'll close this piece, and then we can take questions if you would like to do that. Steve, you can just let us know. But we will post this to the YouTube channel, so for teachers who want to work with their students on this content, or college faculty, or any of you who want to share this out with your audiences, we will have this later in the day today, probably by 4 o'clock, posted. We've got an amazing team in India with Mila, who's been producing these this week. So thank you all for all of your time, and we hope that you'll join us tomorrow when we are really looking at the leadership with the young, incredible inclusive leaders who are going to take all of us forward and frankly show a lot of us what it is we are supposed to be doing. So we look forward to working with all of you, and thank you so very much for your time. And Steve, you let us know if you want to do questions a little bit in an outtake, or if everyone needs to take off. But we do have a few questions, and we can stop this piece of it.
I'm certainly, if